Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today, instead of giving a hot take review on the games we just finished playing, we're going to continue our series on board games as stories. This is going to be part 2. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about how board games have some components that feel very similar to stories. You've got the introduction or opening. You've got the kind of the story development or build up. Then you've got the climax of the story and then the conclusion of the story. And we think board games do those same elements, or some of them do them very well. And so 2 weeks ago, we talked about the best openings in board games, or games that we thought did openings really well. This week, we're going to continue the series with the best build-ups, kind of the story development. What's the development to the game? How did things grow towards the climax? So we're going to be covering our top 5 games in that list. Before we get into that topic, though, just a little bit of upkeep here. I mentioned that we're going to be changing our format a little bit and kind of alternating our review episodes with some special episodes. And one idea that we have for maybe some recurring episodes is going to be like a mailbag. So if you have questions, you'd like us to read your question on the air and answer them, we'd love for you to send it to us. You can send that to tim@boardgamehottakes.com and just put mailbag in the subject if you wouldn't mind. It'll make it easier for me to search those out and find them. But as we get questions in, if we get a decent volume, maybe we'll do repeated episodes on it. But at least one, I thought it'd be fun to just have an episode where we respond to your questions. Try to keep them, board game related, because that's what this show is all about. We like to talk about board games here. But hey, if it's something board game adjacent, or maybe it's not board game related at all, and you're just really curious about our thoughts on it, feel free to send it over and we'll consider it. The other is that, we've been going through the social media wars of 2022, 2023 with all these platforms rising and falling and all this stuff, and put our logo and our name on a few different platforms. And after spending a little time on a bunch of them, I think we're kind of settled into 2 places right now. So if you want to follow us on social media, if you want to interact with our polls or questions that we read on the air, if you want to see the types of stuff we're posting about games, I would keep an eye out on Blue Sky. That is an invite-only platform still, but it is growing rapidly. And every time I get an invite, I'm throwing it out to our Twitter followers and trying to get our friends over from Twitter over here. So lots of people join us on Blue Sky. But then the consistent platform that's been out forever is Facebook. And we do have a Facebook group. So go onto Facebook, go to groups and search Board Game Hot Takes. And we got a ton of great people out in our community over there that are chatting, starting to post stuff, even not in relation to our questions, but just people in the Board Game Hot Takes community that are sharing their games they're playing, questions about stuff they're running into. Great place to hang out. So those are the 2 places you can find us most active. We're pretty much inactive everywhere else. What about Mastodon, Adam? Did you keep that up? Are you still active on Mastodon?
Ooh, I haven't looked at that in quite some time. There wasn't much board game talk going on over there, and it was all weird, all federated. If anybody knows anything about Mastodon or Lemmy or any of that stuff, I don't know much about it. Centralized, decentralized, federated, unfederated. I didn't get. I'm getting too old for that side of the internet.
That sounds ridiculously complicated.
That's why I never started in the first place.
Right? That's how I know I'm getting old. Where's the desktop, guys? Show me where the desktop is.
Where's the message board?
To put a stamp on a letter and just mail it to me. Blue Sky, Facebook groups right now. Find us there, come hang out, and would love to interact with you on those places. All right, let's jump into this topic. So 2 weeks ago, we did this episode on top 5 intros or openings to board games. And I think it's really funny because I'm not sure that we all had the same idea of what that meant to us, and that's okay. But it was pretty clear to me that I was really focusing on the mechanisms of what makes, what mechanisms in a game make a great opening to a game. They kind of feel like a story opening. And Chris, I could tell, was very focused on actually storytelling in the games. And that makes sense because that's what Chris is really into, and I'm a little bit more mechanically focused. But just to make sure that we're kind of level setting and people understand what we mean, at least while we're talking about the games, we mean, you guys want to talk a little bit about what the build up, in a board game means to you, and how how you made your list. What does that mean to you for tonight's episode?
Great question, Tim. And this one I tried to look at more as I would compare it to a book. So, some books have that great exposition, setting the scene. They have that incredible prose or this slow kind of build up towards the climax. So you've got what's the guy that does Cryptonomicon and Neil Stevenson, Snow Crash. So he just has all kinds of wacky stuff in his books, incredibly dense. You learn as you're going with a lot of his books. So it's a lot of sci-fi, but it's a lot of hard sci-fi and actual science mixed in. And he's telling you these different things and making these different cases about this and that, or some upcoming technology that's not too far off in the future. So a lot of it you learn as you go, and that's exciting to me. If a board game can do that, I really enjoy that situation. But there's also some books that are just great for the sake of reading. You enjoy the flow of the book, the prose of the book. I think of a book like Lost Horizons, that book from the early 1900s about Shangri-La. If anybody hasn't read that book, it's about, I think it's under 200 pages. Prose is extraordinary. It's just a great book to sit down and you're like, oh, it's already over? I can't believe this thing's already over. That was what a fantastic read this was. And it's already done. And you don't even realize how much fun you had reading the book by the time it's over. So I picked games that gave me that sort of feeling. What about you, Chris?
So I'm going to use the Lord of the Rings analogy. It's an imperfect analogy, but I'm going to use it anyway because I think it actually works pretty well here. So we've got 3 books. We've got 3 movies. I haven't actually read the books, but I have seen the movies. And I think the cool thing about this series is that unlike almost every other series out there of movies, trilogies in particular, all 3 of these are awesome. And they're perfect examples of where each of these pieces fits into the puzzle. So you've got the Fellowship of the Ring, right? You're getting the band back together. You're pulling together this team. You're figuring out who are the characters that you're going to be watching? Who are the people you're going to care about? People, or I guess I should say elves or dwarfs, whatever. Who are the characters you're going to care about? They pull all of that together so nicely. And that's what round 1 was for us. To me, it was all about the setup of the story. Who are the characters that we're going to be interacting with in these games? Then you've got the 2 towers. Now, the problem with a lot of series is that middle, it just ain't nothing but middle. There's a bunch of stuff happening. But that's important in a story like The Lord of the Rings, and it's also important in a game. So you've got the setup where you learn about all the different characters, all the different scenarios, but the middle is where it all starts playing out. And for a game, in a lot of ways, that can be pretty tough because mechanisms in a game don't always tell a story, especially that middle part where you're seeing the development that goes from that very early stage where you're learning who the characters are all the way through the end where there is this big, exciting finish. You know, a lot of times in a lot of games, even the ones that purportedly tell a story, you're just kind of, you're doing this, you're getting resources, you're trading this for that, those kind of things. So I was trying to pick games that really did tell a story through the mechanisms and through the actions that you're taking over the course of that game and that have the story aspect in it as well. And then, of course, the finale I'll talk about next week. But that's kind of what I was thinking about when I was thinking about the middle of the game and what Tim was calling the churn.
I just want to remind you that Empire Strikes Back and Godfather Part 2 exist. So the middle of the story often is the most exciting part. It's not just the Lord of the Rings trilogy that has a great second episode.
Are you forgetting about Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3, Chris? Come on. Who am I talking about? Who am I talking to?
Oh, Back to the Future 2. Yep. Great. Great example.
These are the exceptions that prove the rule, my friends.
All right. Well, again, so I think I am thinking about this a little more mechanically, and I'm not talking about the way a board game actually tells a story, but I do think that just like a great story, board games, the best board games have a great build up to that climax. You've been introduced at the opening, at the setup of what the game, the direction it's going to go. And then the games that I picked were games that I felt really had a build up. It wasn't just repetitive turns doing the same thing over and over again. It was like, I can see that this is growing. It's developing towards a climax or something we're building up to, we're climbing to. And of course, this exists in a lot of games. There's very few games that I would put in my top 100 games that aren't in some way engine building games. But I picked what I thought were some of the best examples that really drive the direction. It's not just slight movements, it's major movement from the start of the game to the end of the game and how that builds towards a climax. That's how I went with it. And I'm excited to hear what you guys have on your list this week. Let's start with number 5.
All right, first up for me, and I'm not sure if these are in any particular order. I came up with my list, and the way I jotted them down, I'm just going to go backwards, strangely. I don't know if that's significant or not. I don't think it is, but I'm going to start small here. I'm going to start with a game called Age of Galaxy. And if you're looking for grammatical tips on this one, don't go with the title of this game, but go with the gameplay of this game. This is designed by Jeffrey CCH. The publisher is Ice Makes Games. This is a tiny little box of explosive gameplay and fantastic, what I think is fantastic storytelling. So the game starts off with a tame first round. You got a hand of, I think it's 7 cards. You're selecting one of these major ideologies. You're going to play a couple of these other cards or characters out there as the game goes on, where you devise your major ideology. That's going to allow you to populate certain planets and give you some kind of direction in the game as far as what you can do and what you can't do. The first round, the first chapter of the book, if you like, it's pretty tame. There's none of this military conquest action at the end of that first round of the game. But then things start getting intense. Each subsequent round, there's this sort of auction that happens during the course of play, where you're going to have to decide how much military to build up to try to be the conqueror at the end. And then you're going to be able to essentially colonize a planet or take somebody else's planet. So that's a kind of an intense battle amongst all the players, an intense piece of the story that's happening as these rounds go on and on. A lot of these games, like Tim said, they have this sort of this buildup or this engine building piece to them. And that's no exception here with Age of Galaxy. You're playing more characters, a few more characters, up to 3, that'll give you some assistance with your engine. You're gaining techs. Again, nothing new here, but there's a little tech tree you're climbing up. And before you know it, this is like one of those quick reads I was talking about, a lot going on. But before you know it, this game comes to an end. But that middle part where you're making the decisions, what technologies to take, which little characters. I think the cards are so great and so much character in each one of these cards, and what they offer you, that tells a story right there in which direction you're going to go. And then you're flipping these little galaxy cards over with these different planets on them. I love that piece of the story here too. So much going on. I love the nice phase structure. It has a nice rhythm to it, kind of like different chapters. Each subsequent chapter gets more and more exciting, more and more intense as everybody's going their different way. You can see the strategies develop and how you're going to counter. Can you counter? Man, I need to go back to this game. I haven't played it in a while. That's Age of Galaxy.
That's a good one, Adam. I will confess that was not my favorite game when we played it, but I can't argue with you about the storytelling. It is there's some good story in there and so much neat stuff packed into that tiny, tiny little box.
Such a tiny box.
All right. Well, my number 5 is a game that we've talked about on this show before, and it's Pan Am, designed by Prospero Hall and published by Funko Games. This is a game that easily could have fit into any one of the categories that we're talking about, because there is so much storytelling happening in this for what otherwise is a pretty basic resource management and route building game. But I think the place where Pan Am really shines is in that middle section. It's in the churn. It's in how things are developing from the initial setup of the game up until the big ending. And there isn't a particularly big ending here. There isn't a particularly big start in this one. It's really the middle is where this game shines. And the reason for that, I think, there's a couple things. One of them is that every round you're going to flip this card. It's an event card. And the event card covers essentially, it's not exactly once per decade, but basically you're playing through 6 or 7 rounds, and each one of those is going to be something like a decade in the history of Pan Am and in the history of the world. So, for example, once you hit the 1940s, you're in World War II, and all of a sudden, all of the resources of the country are going to be going toward creating military aircraft. And then you hit the 50s, and World War II is over. And now there's this glut of aircraft, and you can buy cheap airplanes because we're decommissioning all these military aircraft. So there's these neat plot points that come up at the beginning of each round that, one, tell a story that's actually historically relatively accurate, but also that affect the gameplay, because each of those little events has some pretty significant impact on how that round is going to play out. And again, very tied to the story, the historical story that's being told by the game. And the other thing is the Pan Am phase of the game. For those who have not played it, you're actually not playing Pan Am. You're playing against or sort of parallel to Pan Am. Each player is an individual small airline trying to get out there and make a name for themselves. And Pan Am is kind of this juggernaut that starts out in Miami and starts buying up all these routes over the board. And each round, they're going to buy up at least one, maybe more routes. And maybe you hit the jackpot because they buy yours and you get a whole bunch of money. So having Pan Am buy you out isn't necessarily a bad thing. But what you see is this airline growing and growing and growing. And what starts as this little nugget of an airline down in Miami at the beginning of the game. By the end, it's like this octopus that's stretching all over the board, and you're kind of gaming out, how am I going to get them to buy mine, because I want to get the big bucks so I can buy a lot of stock, and which translates into points. And it just plays out. There's so much storytelling there in the way that plays out that I can actually picture in my mind the feeling of, the story, the historical story just developing as you play that game. And I think it's terrific.
That's a great pick, Chris. And I think why it works really well here is because this is a game that does not have a big opening. It doesn't have a big intro. Yeah, there's a little bit of information revealed, the first event card that gets flipped up, but otherwise, there's not a whole lot that gets revealed at the beginning of the game. And the churn, the buildup really is where this game exists. And it's pretty interesting because it's cyclical. It's like, yeah, I built an airport and I bought these routes, but then I used them all up. So now I have to acquire more stuff to do that. But you do have some build. You're starting to build bigger planes that you can put out there. You're starting to get more money income coming in because you've sold your routes to Pan Am or because you've built airlines. So there is a build up, and it's cyclical, and it tells a fun story that's leading towards the end. And then the conclusion, or the climax, it's not that great. It's like you count the number of shares at the end of the game, and usually people are within a few shares of each other. So this is a great game that represents the buildup of a game and how it can be done well, even when those other parts aren't particularly, exceptional.
Yeah, both you, Chris, and Tim nailed it. The storytelling is the churn is where it's at in this game, and those event cards, Chris, are fantastic. Something unique happens. Everyone's either cheering for this event, like, oh, I'm in the perfect position, just coincidentally now I can sell this airplane and do this and get my airplane back maybe, and all these things happen. Great fun. That play in Sedona we had was one of the funnest plays of this game, one of the funnest games I've played in a long time. So great pick, Chris.
All right, well, my first pick is going to do kind of the same thing, and it's going to talk about a game that has a great build up and not much else. And that's why I wanted to feature it here. The rest of the games on my list, I think, do all the parts of the story really well. But I think this particular game does build up wonderfully. This is Space Base. This was designed by John D. Clare and published by AEG. And so Space Base, there's a little information revealed at the first round. Who's first player? What are your one starting card that flips over? But from there, the game just grows. And the way this game plays, if you don't know it, is essentially on your turn, you roll 2 6-sided dice. And you've got a tableau of 12 different cards in front of you. You can either pick 2 of those cards to activate, the ones that represent each of the 2 dice you rolled, or you can add those 2 dice together and activate one card that represents the 2 dice, and that's usually a little bit stronger. So at the start of the game, everyone's got a bunch of cards. All they do is maybe give you a coin to buy something, or they give you maybe an income for future coins. But when you buy a card, you replace the one in your tableau, and it goes up on top of your tableau. And that means that whenever somebody else rolls those dice, if they happen to trigger the cards that are on the top of your tableau, you get the benefit for that. And so this game just starts to escalate quickly. Early on, few boring turns, not a lot's happening. I got a couple coins here and there. I bought a couple cheap cards, but then all of a sudden I managed to stack a few things on my 7, and somebody else rolled that, and boom, big dopamine hit. I just got a whole bunch of stuff off that. Now I can buy a level 2 card, and I can add something really fun into that slot. And there's also, a variety of cards that can get added there. You can add some cards that will let you start to charge them up, and they'll build up over a few turns and blow up. So this game just has such a fun arc to it, where it starts so, just kind of like nothing's happening, and it just builds up until every roll of dice, no matter who's rolling it, is going to trigger a bunch of effects for everybody. And then it's over when somebody hits 40 points. So the climax, not very exciting. The end game has never been my favorite part of this game, but the build up still makes me come back to it because I enjoy that part of just getting to make those selections, build up my tableau. And when that lucky dice hits, and it's right on the stack that I just built 5 cards on, that's an exciting moment, an exciting build up on a game.
Yeah, Tim, this is pure build up, getting those cards, getting that lucky dice. You don't have a chance to go to the restroom because you're hoping somebody else hits on all the stuff that you've built up. So yeah, you are glued to this one during the course of play. Great pick again, Tim, with Space Base. Up next for me is Brian Boru. This is a game we played recently up in Portland. I had so much fun playing this one. Again, this is one where the intro isn't super great. Just throwing a little piece, everyone's throwing their little circle on one of the different lands. Okay, that's fun. But the churn, I thought, is great. And the way that this thing kind of cycles back on itself. You've got these three mini games around the table. You've got the who you're going to get married to track, and you've got the Viking management track up here, and you've got the monastery track over here, and then you've got the main track, the area majority. How are those going to get distributed out? So that builds throughout the game. No one's going to have any area majorities, any of these things. So that's kind of one of the main stories, one of the main subplots of this game is how are these areas getting built up? Oh, Tim, now he's got 3 over in Munster over here. Is that going to give him enough to get it? Oh, look at Steve. Now he's going for it. What's going to happen there? Oh, Steve just got a monastery. That's fantastic. Look at that. But wait, now Chris has he's got already these leftovers in a monastery track. He's definitely going to win that next time. Oh, look at this marriage track up here. Tim is second. He's way up here. Now he's going to be first, and he just got some rewards for being second, and he's going to be way up top starting the next round. So I like the memory aspect from round to round in this game. Same with the Vikings. These Vikings are always meddling and everything. You don't want to be last on the Viking track, that's for sure, because somebody gets to pick the little Viking shield and plop it on your head on one of your territories and take over one of your little, you thought you had control of Leinster, but nope, now the Vikings are coming in and taking control of that territory. So all of these little subplots to this story against the backdrop of this pseudo trick-taking kind of hand management situation. The story here got way better too once we figured out the card order, the highest cards of each color. That made the story a lot more fun, keeping track of that as these rounds went on. So those with just the flow of the game itself, I really enjoy the resolution of the tricks from lowest to highest. Past this, whoever wins a trick gets to lead or gets to decide which territory, which little circle to go after on the map for the next round, and that starts the whole thing over again. Just keep doing that over and over and over until you're out of cards. Start the next round, go again. That's Brian Baru. A lot of fun in the build up here with, again, a subpar kind of climax and conclusion. I think you get to choose if you're going to marry Estrid or spurn her. I guess that's kind of fun. And then you get to see, what you want to use that card for. If you want to be an ally of the Vikings or an ally for the you get more territories. But the churn is where it's at for me in Brian Baru.
Brian Baru, is it a love story? Is it a war story? Is it an adventure story? Yes.
It's all of the above.
Brian Baru doesn't just tell a story; it tells all the stories. No, that's a great pick. That was actually on my short list too, Adam. I'm glad you picked that one. So my number 4 is Auztralia, designed by Martin Wallace and published by Stronghold Games. This is another one that wasn't my favorite game. I actually had a pretty mixed review of this one when we did our review episode of this. I don't know, it feels like a couple of years ago now. But what an interesting story. And this is a game where a lot of the story came in the middle, like we've been talking about. And just uniqueness of story, I think, here is a really interesting aspect of this game. So it's got some route building going on. You're doing some farming. You're doing some Settlers of Catan type of stuff. Oh, but wait, you're also trying to defend all these farms and cities from the great old ones. Cthulhu's there, some guys that have like weird, snakes coming out of their heads and things. All the stuff that you'd expect from Cthulhu and his pals is all showing up here in the outback of Australia, where you're trying to build railroads and farms. And what a wacky story to start with. But the way it plays out as you're developing your civilization here, you're building out into the outback, and you're making your farms and you're building ports and you're putting these railroads in that are going to provide access. And then at some point during the game, the old ones awaken and they start showing up. And they start deciding they want to eat your farm or they want to eat your port. And so you have to start defending against the great old ones. And it creates such an odd storytelling experience that you're doing all these things that on the surface seem so, I won't say bland, because how many great games are there out there where you're building farms and routes, et cetera, but all of a sudden you're combating monsters as well. There's a lot of fun in that story, and there's a lot of fun in the way it plays out in this game. I wish I liked the game more as a game overall, but I think the storytelling, in particular, the storytelling as this game develops, is pretty doggone cool.
This is such a fantastic pick. I wish it had been on my list because there is a wonderful build up here as you're building things up and you're moving up this time track. And the more and more then these events are going to happen and start to put monsters out on the board and eventually the great old ones. And it had such a great arc to just build up to what was actually a pretty exciting climax and a cool conclusion as well. But the build up here just had so many elements that developed where at first it is just, I'm doing something economically. Wait, then I got to worry about, wait, now Chris needs some help over there. And if I don't help him, I might not be able to stop this monster myself. So it really changed. It evolved. It built up to the conclusion of the story. That's a great example, Chris.
What a great pick. And what an odd game. Have you either of you gone back to this one and played it again since we played it that night?
I would love to. I have not had a chance to, but I would really like to try this again.
I want to also. I haven't played it, but I want to love this game. It's too cool, and it's too cool an idea not to love. So I really want to go back and hope I was wrong the first time.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I want to go back to it. It's so wacky and weird. I need to try it again.
Be a good game for a double take.
All right. Well, my number 4 here tonight is a game that actually has a pretty great intro, and it has a great climax, like a wonderful climax. So it was really hard for me to put it on this list because I almost saved it to next week. But the buildup is just too good. And that's Anachrony. Anachrony is a worker placement game about time travel where you've got to get into mech suits, go out into this central city to collect the resources you need so that you can build up your civilization and the resources you need to travel back in time and borrow resources from your past self. It's got a lot of interesting and complex elements going on. But why the buildup is so great here is that in a typical worker placement game, you tend to have a bunch of shared worker placement spots, and those are available the whole game. Maybe there's a few that get added over the course of the game, like Lords of Waterdeep does that. But in Anachrony, a main part of the strategy here is to go out, collect the resources, and build new buildings for yourself in your city. Because the reason the climax is cool is that after the first 4 rounds, all of a sudden the world blows up. And a lot of the worker placement spaces that were available are going to start to disappear on you. So you can't even use the mechs and get out to the city. You need to have built up your city to be able to survive, to be able to do the main tasks you need to get to the end of the game and eventually evacuate the city. So the buildup here is so great, and it's such an integral part. And it's not even just about building up the spaces for the workers, but to whatever extent you want to, you can add as many workers as you want to in this game. You can just build up a huge fleet of workers if that's where you want to spend your time. This buildup is so varied as well. Every time you play it, it's exciting to see what's going to be in that market, what I'm going to be able to pick up this time that's going to benefit my specific civilization goals or my evacuation goals, and also help me really build up more efficiently than the other people at the table. So I love the buildup. I love the story development in Anachrony.
Another great pick, Tim. I hadn't thought about this one amidst the backdrop of a storyline, but what a great story it tells with the intro and the buildup and then that climax and the resolution. It's almost exactly like you would model a book after, even though I'm not academic, I don't have the academic story process, build up, development, but it has all those elements that I think of in my little primitive brain that a story should have. And it does it really nicely in Anachrony. Oh, that's a great pick.
Yeah, I'm going to second that, Tim. Great pick. If you hadn't snatched this one up, I would have considered using it. And one of the things that they did so well in this game that I think is just fantastic from a storytelling perspective is they actually managed to take time travel and use it in a way that it was interesting and thematically appropriate and actually functioned as a good mechanism of the game. I think that's great storytelling and great mechanisms all rolled together.
All right, next up, number 3 on my list is Brass Birmingham. This is by Martin Wallace, and it was by Roxley Games. I really enjoy this game. I need to go back to it. There's so many aspects of it that are super fun to me. One of those is just the simple hand management. You've got, I think it's 8 cards in your hand at any one time. You start off, you just play one, but then every other round, you get 2 actions back to back. So how are you going to build those up? Are you going to spend a bunch of money and then you're going to be going last next time? Are you going to not spend that much money? Or are you going to try to go first back-to-back times? Are you going to go from last place to first place? Then you get 4 turns in a row. So just that hand management, money spending aspect is some fun choices there. But the story is on the board itself You're building these routes, putting industries out in these different cities in old-timey England. So you're building up these different networks. Then you've got that mid-game, that mid-story shift from the canal era to the rail era. All your level 1 industries get you scored and then cleared off. Did you put any level 2 industries out there? Did you put them out there in a smart way so your network, your story is ready to continue in that second phase of the book? I think that's really neat. I also like this market, the beer, coal, and iron management aspect of this game. That's fun to play around with, and you have to be kind of opportunistic. Look at this. The iron market is in dire need of a refill, so you can plop one of your things. It's opportunistic in this story too. I also enjoy raining down ash and smoke on all the little children in industrial England. I think that's fantastic to watch them suffocate and their health just get wasted. That's fantastic for me too. And then, as this game develops, it's really emergent. You can start seeing other people's strategies. Are you going to try to counter their strategies? Is Tim going to try to get all the clay pots up in Utoxeter, or however you say it? Leah, chime in here, please. Or am I going to be able to grab those clay pots and prevent him from getting all of his stuff out there? Some fun choices, a neat story. I love the theme here. That's brass. I picked Birmingham. That's the one I'm more familiar with. And Lancashire also has a similar aspect, but I prefer the story here in Brass Birmingham.
Chris doesn't want to say anything, so I'll just say, Adam, that's a great pick. And, like mechanisms wise, the story builds up in that, as you build more and more buildings, of course, the buildings get stronger. So there's clearly a build up and development.
Yeah.
Quite to the contrary. I was going to say, very nice pick, Adam.
Thank you so much, Chris.
No, and for that same reason, I actually really like that switch. That's good storytelling. The fact that you switch from the two eras, from one mechanism to another. Or one method of transportation to the other. I think that's pretty cool.
Still not as good as Nucleum.
Again, brass isn't too strong in the intro here, I don't think, and then not too strong of a climax or resolution. You're just counting up score, and that takes a while to count all this stuff up and march your guy along. So really the churn is where it's at here for brass for me.
All right. My number 3 is Final Girl, designed by Evan Derrick and AJ Porfirio and published by Van Ryder Games. This one, like the movies that it's based on, are really big on churn and really big on the denouement, but aren't that big on the build-up. The Final Girl series, which for those who haven't played it, is actually a base set of mechanisms to which you add in these boxes that are called episode boxes. And really what they are is they're based on this set of classic horror movies. A lot of it probably borders on copyright infringement, but you have ones that are kind of a ripoff of the Friday the 13th with Jason, or Freddy Krueger with Nightmare on Elm Street and Aliens. So there's a whole bunch of those. And you have all these different games. Each one comes with the eponymous Final Girl that's trying to survive and slay the killer, and comes with a killer and comes with a location. And so you can swap out the different episode boxes and play a different game using that same mechanism set that comes in the core box. And like I said, these are not games or movies that are known for their big character development. They're known for a lot of churn, and churn in this case means bad guys going around slicing up all the innocent people until there's only the final girl, and then there's a big finale. But it's really the middle we're focused on here. And in this game, the middle of the game is an absolute delight. It's going to bring you right back to all those movies you watched back in the day where you're running around, say, the circus or the Camp Happy Trails, trying to escape from Hans the Butcher or whichever bad guy you happen to be playing against. You're going to be trying to pull items that you can use to defend yourself out of various locations and escaping, making narrow escapes when Hans comes after you, and trying to there's a lot of things that happen. One part of the game I was playing where I got to get in a golf cart and send the golf cart careening off into the killer so that I could escape. Just wacky stuff like that going on. It's almost like watching a doggone movie. This one I'd be tempted to come in for the finale as well, but I'll try not to when we actually get to the finale episode. But the middle definitely reminds me so much of those classic movies. An absolute joy to play.
Chris, for my friend who is a total moron, you said this term denouement. Can you explain what that means for my friend, because he's an idiot?
I think it means like the big finale, but it's been a long time since I took my last English class, my last literature class. I think that's right. I'll look it up while we're talking.
All right, thanks.
Final Girl is a cool choice, Chris. There's a couple solo games that I think do this really well. Final Girl is a solo only game, I think, but there's a couple that do that really well because, of course, that's what a solo game is all about. Is it's not playing competitively against somebody else, but it's building up to a finale. And so that's cool to hear that Final Girl handles that really well. I'm still interested in trying this one. I haven't had a chance to yet.
It's a fun one. And by the way, Adam, first of all, I appreciate your calling me on that one. And I have to admit that I did not have the dictionary definition right off the top of my head, but I looked it up and I was more or less right. According to Merriam-Webster, the denouement is the final outcome of the main dramatic complication in a literary work.
Well, I'm going to let my friend know all about that.
So it's a conclusion, basically.
Yeah, grand finale.
All right, cool. Well, my number 3, and by the way, my list, I'm kind of just picking and choosing as we're going here. I'm not going off a specific 1 through 5, but trying to mix it up a little bit. My number 3 is a game that I got introduced fairly recently. It's a fairly new Stefan Feld game, and this is Marrakesh. I've played 2 full games of Marrakesh at this point, and I am just in love with this game. But the best part about this game is the build-up. This is pure engine building. This is pure development. So the way this works is that every round you have 12 different colors of little tokens. These are your keshes, right? We're in Marrakesh, and you're sending out these different workers, different types of workers out to do things. So in order to take a round, you pick 3 of these colors for that round, and everybody else picks 3, and then you put them all in this cube tower. And a bunch of them fall out, but not all of them. So some of them get stuck in there. And the 3 that you pick, you've put little markers on your individual player board in different sections of the player board that represent where these keshes interact. So you've kind of selected for that round, what am I going to be trying to do that round? And when it comes to the cube tower, they all fall down there. And then the ones that have fallen out are available for a draft that round. So basically people are going to go around and pick the keshes that they're going to use. If you pick a keshe that corresponds with one of the action tokens you use, great. You get to put the keshe on that space. And now that action is 1 component stronger than in the past. So each of these have a build up to it. For example, one of the keshe areas, the gray keshes, allow you to buy technology tiles. And if you only have 1 keshe there, you only have a limited supply of the types of tiles you can buy. But as you get up to higher powers, for example, at level 3, when you've got 3 keshes in that region, then you've got another selection of a few different tiles you can purchase that are stronger, that are more powerful. Or you could choose to buy 3 level 1 tiles. And so every one of these sections, though, interacts a little bit differently, and they all give you a build-up. They make your actions more powerful. So you're consistently, over the course of this game, plays over 4 rounds, you're going to draft somewhere around 10 to 12 keshes every round and add them to these sections on your board, and they're going to get stronger and stronger. And so there's just a wonderful build-up to this, where the first round feels like you're not doing a whole lot. Second round, well, I'm getting a little more powerful. I just did a couple cool combos there. And by the final round, it's got a great climax because there's so much build-up. But the build-up is the fun part. Every round, the draft, what drops out of that tower? What did my opponent draft? Did he take 2 of the color that I wanted? I'm not even going to get 1 of them this round. So many great things that happen during that build-up in Marrakesh, and a game that I am really excited to add to my collection and keep going back to over and over again. This is an evergreen game, I think. This is a game that I will be playing a long time.
It's high praise. This is one you've been talking a lot about recently, and one that I would like to play.
Yeah, same here. Definitely one I'm looking forward to trying.
Up next for me is my number 2, and I think these are my definitive top 2 for sure. As far as the churn goes, the storytelling aspect, the part I enjoy, the plot building the best. This is Ankh, Gods of Egypt by Eric Lang and published by Simon Games. So here you've got ancient Egypt, you've got these different gods battling for power. So that's kind of the setup, which is pretty cool in itself. And the game builds and builds, and it starts off relatively slow with this action selection mechanism that's pretty cool. Your gods gaining these followers, you're constructing these pyramids or obelisks or temples, gaining control of these different regions. And then you're going to have a series of events that occur. And is it going to be construct a monument? Is it going to be go to battle? Is it going to be build a camel train? How fun is that? A camel train, which is basically dividing up the territories. You're going to add another region to compete over. So that is pretty cool and strategic. Actually, I think that's fun. Not only that, but your god's powers are building. So you're going to be able to do some fun things with the powers that emerge as this game goes on. There's a lot of nuance in the writing of Eric Lang in this game, we'll say. And then why not throw in a crazy monster or two? You've got 3 monsters, 3 different types of monsters that might be more than one, might be available per person playing the game, depending on the player count. So those are going to pop out and add a little crazy sideshow, side plot, subplot to the game. Oh, and then of course, as this game goes on, these gods are competing for power over the land. You've got all these followers coming and going and getting sacrificed. But then you have the merge occur where the 2 weakest gods merge into a mega god. And are those 2 players going to be able to come together and be this super powerful god and gain ground on the other gods out there, combine forces and take the lead? If you're Chris and Steve, you bet that's what's going to happen. You're going to take down Tim and Adam's gods and win the whole game in a surprising, dramatic fashion. What a fun story this game tells. Tons of nuance in all my plays that I've had of Ankh, which is maybe, I say all my plays, maybe 6 or 7 plays of Ankh, but something new that I read in the story every time I play this game. Really enjoy this one. That's Ankh.
Another great choice, Adam. And I love that you called out the merge there, because the merge, a lot like the big, whatever they call the event in Anachrony, is a really cool thing that, like Anachrony, happens not at the very end of the game, but happens far enough into the game so you're sort of getting toward the end, but it can be a real game changer. And that just can, it's like a huge plot twist, like 2/3 of the way through the movie, we were going, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. And I just love that. Great storytelling.
Yeah, and just spoiler. So when I'm talking about climax on our next session in this series, I'm going to be talking about things that happen right coming up towards the end of the game. And this is a perfect candidate for great climax as well. This is one that I would have picked there because I think the climax of when that merge happens and, like coming right up to it, who's falling right behind, but then you merge and then the last couple turns, kind of the, what's happened in that climax. It goes quickly after that, but there's a lot of exciting change in the game. So great climax, but also a great build up in this game. A lot of development around the board, adding new techs, adding new monsters to your fleet. Good pick, Adam. Thanks. Surprisingly.
All right. My number 2 is Star Wars Rebellion, designed by Corey Konieczka and published by Fantasy Flight Games. I remember the couple of plays that I have with Tim in this game, and I was slaughtered both times, so very bad memories. But the great memory from this game is sitting there thinking to myself, I feel like I'm in the middle of a story as I play through this game. It does suffer from a little bit too much epicness, maybe a little bit too much storytelling. This game can go on for a long time for a 2-player game. It's an investment, but in so many ways, this game is really worth it because of the storytelling aspect, especially if you are a big fan of the Star Wars universe. I mean, as you're playing through this, the story that unfolds is absolutely terrific. The intro, I mean, everybody sort of knows the intro. Everybody knows who the Rebellion is. Everybody knows who the Empire is. So I didn't feel like there was a ton going on there. But once you get into the churn of this game and you start seeing these units coming out and these cards being drawn and the leaders coming into play and the cards that you draw that make different events happen. Like, just for an example, I had to look up one that just knocked me out when we were playing, and it's called an Old Friend, a card that you can draw. And it's Han Solo, and if you play that card in the Bespin system, then you get to recruit Lando Calrissian, or if you place it in the Kashyyyk system, you get to recruit Chewbacca. I mean, when you're playing the game and you whip that card out in the middle, if you're the Rebellion, it's like seeing the best scene of the movie and making it happen. I mean, I remember playing that card and just thinking, what a delight it is to watch this story play out as I'm working my way through this game. Now, all of them ended up getting killed. So, there was that. But at least in that moment where I was making that great story happen, I was just absolutely loving it. So what a great story this game tells.
This is an awesome pick, Chris, because not only does it mechanically have that development, that build up over the course of the game, and it does lead to a climax. It does lead to a final moment where the base is revealed and everything, comes to a head there. But it works both mechanically, but as you mentioned, story based. Like it is a true story that's happening while your fleets are building up, while you're moving around and things are evolving over the course of the game. Yeah, awesome pick.
A fantastic pick, Chris. This is one where the tension is there too throughout the build up, as you're playing this game of cat and mouse. You're the Empire trying to go to all these different planets and find the freaking rebel base. Where the heck is it? And if you're the rebels, you're like 2 planets away from the Death Star about to trample on you and blow you all up. Are you going to try to escape and get the heck out of there? So many good moments in this game. Another fun moment, if you're Luke Skywalker, you have to go to the Dagobah system, I think, and meet up with Yoda or something in order to become Jedi Luke. So if I'm the Empire, one of the first things I'm doing is going to go blow up the Dagobah system so that that can't even happen. Anyway, what a fun game. Great pick, Chris.
Thanks.
All right. My number 2 today, I had to go with a deck builder because I think deck building has some of the coolest build up in board games ever since that was first introduced in Dominion years ago. It's always interesting to see how deck builders can really take this really minimal starting hand of cards, starting deck of cards, and allow you to evolve it into something that turns into big combo turns. And I had a hard choice with this one, but then I picked a game that not only built your engine or kind of, had a build up in your deck, but also had a build up in so many other ways. So the game I picked is Revive. This was designed by Helge Messner, Christian Amundsen Asby, Elif Svensson, and Anna Wormland. And this was published by Aporta Games. Revive is set in the very far distant future where the small amount of humanity that survived a, global climate event are living underground. They've lived there for thousands of years in separate little communities, and they've kind of developed differently. So when the ice starts to melt and there's some green coming back, they're going to come up and start to explore. And each of you represents a civilization that's just getting back on their feet again. You're coming up out of the ground, and you're starting to recruit different people you're from your civilization to be workers. And so you're going to be building up your deck like a typical deck builder does, but it does it pretty thematically. And that each round, any one that you've used that round is going to go into hibernation for that generation. And then you're going to recruit new people. So there's a little bit of actual theme here in how the people are using your deck. All right. So aside from the deck building, the other great part about the build up in this game is that you're building out these engines, which are these player boards you've got in front of you. And you've got these 3 little markers that kind of move along tracks. And as you move them along tracks, you can start to unlock new technologies you have access to. You have to spend this energy resource you've got in order to use these things. And at the beginning of the game, you only have 1 energy. So even if you unlock a couple of these, you're only going to get to use 1 until you do a reset. But you're going to start to add energy over the course of the game, and you're going to start to unlock new and new techs, even ones that you can decide what goes on there. So there's so much development. Then your civilization player board also has these little areas that you're going to unlock, these new techs you're going to unlock as you're putting people out on the board. So that mechanically, this game just has so much build up, so many different ways that you're really pushing the story towards a climax. But even visually, this game has a buildup that I've never seen in any other game, because as you're exploring out in this icy wasteland, you're going to flip these tiles over and it turns from these snowy hexes into these, these old cities you're revealing and water that you're revealing. And so even the board presence, even if nobody could hear what you were saying, nobody knew the rules of the game, but they were just watching, they would start to see a development. They'd see the snow melting over the course of the board. So I think Revive just does a great job of adding that build up that a great story can do. And it does it in so many ways. It's not just one thing that's growing. It's like you're finding new people, you're having new conflicts. There's this, you're competing with people for the resources out on the board or the locations at the board that you're going to. I think a great build up here and great example of build up in board games.
Tim, this is a game, we were mentioning it earlier before we did the show. I remember really, really enjoying this game, but I don't remember much about the mechanics or what happens or what went down. I remember the frozen land turning into brown, warm, livable land, and that right there was cool enough. But then everything you just mentioned too is bringing me back a little bit. I really want to go back to this game. I remember feeling very positive about this one after playing. I want to go back and see those story elements that I wasn't necessarily paying attention to that first time around.
Yeah, same here. And I'm glad you called out that thing about the board, the way it changes over the course of the game and you start seeing the snow melt. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of watching the board on Terraforming Mars, where you also see the development, where you can see so much of the development of the game just by looking at the board. It's really kind of a treat.
Yeah, it was really hard not to include Terraforming Mars on this list this week as well, not only for the board state, but also for just the card tableau that's building up and things. But because it had such a perfect opening to mention last week, I left it off this week's list.
Understandable.
Yeah. Okay, my number one is Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. I think the story here is fantastic. The designers here are Vangelis Begirtakis and Varnavas Timiatou, with Hegemonic Project Games as the publisher. So there are tons of things I enjoy about the story aspect of this game, the churn of this game. One of the things is the round structure. You're going to go round after round after round, sort of like different chapters in a book, and like a great book, each chapter builds upon the subsequent chapter. That's exactly what happens here. So it gets more and more complex as you're going on. You just have the battle of the different classes and the interaction between all four. Basically, with every single card that gets played, there's these branching ramifications that echo down through the game board and the game state. You can see it all in front of you, and all of these different things beautifully displayed and produced are all just going to shift around just a bit so you can read the board state right there in front of you. There are so many real world parallels that this game models. You look at the medical strike with Kaiser Permanente here in California right now. I think something like that happened in the game we played, where Steve, the capitalist guy, tried to give me some super low wages. So my guys went on strike. He ended up capitulating and giving me guys some more money, give my guys some more money. So that was fun to see that play out. You've got the Screenwriters Guild. I don't know what their name is. Those guys are on strike too, and you can just see it coming through in this game. And then each round, you've got this end of round voting aspect too. That's an exciting conclusion to each chapter. But even more exciting conclusion to each chapter is paying taxes. Am I right, guys? How fun is that? You get to pay taxes. But going along with that, you get paid all this money coming in and changing hands. You get to see this economic model and this civics model. So you're actually learning tons of stuff as you play this game. So to me, it's like a Neil Stevenson book, like I mentioned earlier, where it's super dense and very heavy, but you're learning as you go. And if you can make your way through it and follow along with it, you come out a brighter person, or having been enlightened in some way or another and seeing things from a perspective you might not have seen them from before. So for all those reasons, Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory is my clear-cut number one as far as churn and storytelling in a board game.
I love this pick for storytelling, Adam, because, storytelling, good storytelling doesn't have to be science fiction or fantasy or something wacky. It can be a historical story. And the same way that I loved the storytelling in Pan Am, I like the storytelling in this game. Seeing it's like reading the newspaper. It's like, what happened? The country took a hard right turn today, and we're kicking out all the immigrants, and we're taking away people's, socialized healthcare. But wait, then the writers strike and the workers strike, and it's exciting. It's exciting in the way that it tells a story that feels like it could be very, very real.
Yeah, and I think that this game, probably more than anything else we've talked about, gives the players control of creating that story. That's not small little movements. It's like major events are happening, but it's because the state player just played a major event that that made healthcare cheaper, or the capitalist player just, took over 2 government buildings or things like that. So it's like the players have real control in the build up in this game and the storytelling. And it's not just build up for your own stuff, but it's built. And Adam's showing us that it looks like he just got the Hegemony box. It's sitting in his house right now.
Ha.
It just arrived, the expanded edition Hegemony. I couldn't resist. I had to buy this game, and I can't wait to play it four-handed by myself tomorrow.
Yeah, there you go.
Does that expand it from a 15-hour game to a 20-hour game?
May not get a lot of play, but some games you just want to have in your... Listen, I'm a minimalist, and some games you just want to have in your collection, even if you know you're not going to get them played a lot, but they're just such perfect works of art. They feel like they belong. They need to be there.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, my number one, I know you guys are going to agree with, because this is a game that you both love. It's Root by Cole Worley, published by Leader Games. I think you said it last week, Tim, or recently, that this is one of our most controversial hot takes episodes. Just to go on the record, I actually like this game, I think more than you guys did, but I don't think, regardless how you feel about this game, that you can argue that it is a masterclass in storytelling in game format. And it starts with that initial lead in with who all the characters are. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about what happens once the story kicks in. Well, you've got all these fascinating characters, and they're all doing something different, and they're all following their different paths. It's like one of those wacky movies where you've got all these different pieces that are all happening in these different areas, and they all come together in odd and unexpected ways, like an Ocean's 11 or whatever. You've got the cats that are out there just expanding and being, what's the word? Expansionist.
Marking their territory.
What's the word I'm looking for?
Marking their territory disgustingly.
Yeah, marking their territory. The conquistador cats. You've got these birds that are out there that are trying to reclaim their glory, but they're really disorganized, and so their big plan falls apart, and they depose their leader because they're losing faith in him. They're like, "Get out of here! I'm taking over now." And you've got this, the Woodland Alliance that's popping up and creating havoc everywhere, and then going back underground and then popping up. And you've got the Wanderer who's out there just trying to capitalize off of all this other stuff that's going on in the forest. Then you start getting into the expansions, and it's crazy. And you have the Otters, who are the people trying to make a lot of money off of the conflict. And it goes on and on and on. And every game of Root is an adorable story being told about these sort of geopolitics playing out in the course of a little forest battle. And it's so delightful that I don't care, you love the game, hate the game, it's worth the time to learn all those extra rules or not. There is so much fun story happening here. This had to be my number one for the middle part of the game.
Yeah, I think, Chris, this is a great pick. And it's interesting that a few picks tonight have been heavily asymmetric games. This Hegemony, Star Wars Rebellion. And I think that really does lead to storytelling in a way that a lot of games just can't carry through, because the story is dictated by these drastically different factions interacting with each other and how they interact with each other, and the way the Woodland Alliance pops up and then blows up an area and kills everybody in it, or the way the raccoon walks out of the what's he called, the vagrant or whatever, walks into a section and just trades with somebody and then goes back and hides in the forest, and so it's just going to lead to a unique story, and in some ways a unique build-up. The story changes, of course, as the factions shift ownership of the different areas on the board throughout the course of the game. So yeah, this is a solid pick, as much as I don't feel it's worth the time to put into it, but very solid pick from this perspective.
Chris, this is a game, if I had a group that was adamant about playing this game, could see myself getting into it and getting into this story and getting familiar with all these different factions and having so much fun, because there is so much story here. And you're right, they are fantastically adorable. And all the different situations that come out of this game are pretty fun. So great pick here with Root.
All right. Well, my last pick is going to be, again, mechanically all about the build up, about what happens between when the game starts and when the climax happens in the conclusion of the game. And this is a game that I think has some of the best buildup that any game has. And it's a little more abstract, but this is Orleans. This was published by Reiner Stockhausen. And this is a bag building game. The whole concept of the game is that you have a player board, has a bunch of action spaces on it, but each of these action spaces take 2 to 3 different types of workers that you have to place there. And the game plays out where you're going to be, every round, you're going to be pulling a certain number of workers out of your bag and putting them on these spaces to take the actions. But almost all the actions really develop the story. They develop the game. They build it up. And it's either, again, abstract in that you're moving up these tracks that are going to just grow your capabilities. They're going to grow how much how many different chips you're going to pull out of the bag. They're going to develop whether you can start to move around this map area and place trade houses out there. They're going to allow you to build new technology spots, new worker placement spots, kind of like Anachrony, although not quite as drastic in that area, but let you build up new worker placement spots. So every action you take here just builds. It just it progresses things in a way that will lead to the climax of the game. Orleans is a game I don't talk a lot about, mainly I think because it has a fairly dry theme, and mainly because I've played it a ton. And, it's just a little on the tired side, but it's always an exciting build-up in a game, and it's always a game that I'm happy to go back and play. So Orleans, had to mention it. It's not something we talk about a lot, but a wonderful game that you should check out if you like to see some cool development in a game and the mechanisms as they go.
This is one I've never played. Have you played it, Chris?
I have. I always am thrilled by that delightful Clemens Franz artwork.
What about the story? Is there a story there, or is Tim full of poop?
I think this one's got about as much story as Azul.
So fantastic. Amazing story is what you're saying.
First of all, Chris, again, not talking about an actual story being told. I'm talking about the element of a story where there's development, where there's build up.
Right?
No. We're not on the same page here.
No, we are not.
Definitely more build up and more story.
Whoa! I could pick Azul for every single one of these categories.
You're moving through cities. You got to go, and then the events happen at the end of every round, and you got to pay some cost, and you're sending your people to the good deeds board and getting extra benefit, racing to the good deeds board. There's so much more going on than Azul from a story perspective. But Chris, I'm gonna let you off the hook here because it's been about 5 years since you played this game. Your tastes weren't very developed. I get it. Like you had a baby's taste buds when it comes to board games the last time you played this game. And at some point, I'll play this again. We'll revisit this game, and you'll get a sense for how many interesting development points are happening in the course of this game.
Tim, you're absolutely right. You have totally convinced me and showed me the error of my ways. This game has a modicum more storytelling than Azul, I will admit. a tiny little atomic level more storytelling than Azul.
I always find that when Tim throws some little backhanded insults at me, it really convinces me and turns me over to his side.
I know. Isn't that how that works?
It's neat.
Well, he just insulted me into
those insults have made me see your perspective, Tim. Yes.
All right. Well, that wraps up the top of our list of our top 5 build-ups in board games. You guys have any final thoughts? Here's the deal with me, right? I couldn't even give you any runners up because there was about 1,000 games I could have named on this list. So many games that have great development, that have great build-up. I think this is what a lot of games do really well, at least modern board games do. And what's going to be harder, and I think more exciting, is next week's episode when we do Climax, because there are a lot of games that don't do that so well, but some that really stand out to me. So I'm really excited for the next episode when we talk about Climax in games. But any final thoughts for you guys? Any runners up you really wanted to call out or anything like that?
I have a couple of runners. I think Spirit Island is one that does the churn pretty well, as you're building up your little deck there and the invaders are coming and you're like, oh, what am I going to do? So that's pretty fun. But then again, like you just said, the climax is like, oh, here we go. We just met the win condition and the game is over. I was also going to mention Smartphone Inc. just because of its smoothness. It's like an easy read. You grab like one of your favorite magazines or like a comic book or something that's just so smooth and slick. You breeze right through it and then you're done. You're like, what just happened? Is the game's over? That was quick. I want to play again. So those are my kind of 2 ones that I'm thinking of. Spirit I just came up with, and then Smartphone Inc. I had thought of earlier. It made my short list. But like you said, Tim, there's tons that do this kind of phase round structure that I really enjoy, that are kind of like the chapters, and they build on each other and build and build and build. That's an enjoyable process for me.
Yeah, I've got a couple of runners up that were ones that had already been mentioned, and so I didn't want to mention them again, even though they probably deserved it. Nemesis is one. That's storytelling from beginning to end, and I don't think there's all the way up through the finale, the denouement. Nemesis is great storytelling. Same thing with Terraforming Mars, watching that develop over the course of the game and seeing the board become more and more vibrant and Earth-like is really exciting. But the one that I had that was a runner-up that wasn't on my, it was on my list, but I cut out at the end was Lost Ruins of Arnak. I mean, this is just a fun game with a fun story. It's very adventure-y. It's, Raiders of the Lost Ark is in the form of a resource management board game. And I just think it's great fun. And the story, I think the reason I didn't leave this one in there in the long run was because the story wasn't quite as illuminated through the gameplay as it was in the games that I did end up leaving on the list. So some fun story in there, but it just didn't really come through in the gameplay as much as the others.
I do think Lost Ruins does some good build up because you are starting to reveal new worker placement spaces over the course of the game. There's the story of what happens when I go and explore this space. What's the location, but also what's the monster that's going to be there I got to deal with. So there's some pretty fun elements. I thought about Lost Ruins. I think Revive for me was a better fit because I wanted to include a deck builder here. And then I have one more deck builder that's going to show up on the next week. If I might have to fight Adam for it, I suspect, but it's going to show up 2 weeks from now when we do the climax episode. But that's a great pick too, Chris. All right, cool. Well, that'll wrap up this episode. I have a couple quick reviews I want to read, and because we are very, very thankful to those of you that take your time and take the time to leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. This helps people find the show. It makes me feel great reading it. Makes it feel like this is all worthwhile. So thanks for these great reviews. I got a couple this week I want to read. The first is from the Netherlands. We don't have a lot of reviews from the Netherlands, so this was really exciting. This is from Uteman on Apple Podcasts over in the Netherlands, and the title was Best Board Game Podcast for Me. They said, my board game hobby activity level goes up and down. However, this podcast gives me consistent entertainment. Waiting for it every Monday. One important question, what is this in right after this? Just the music part, or do you do ad reads on other platforms? That's a great question. And here's the deal, right? We don't do ad reads, although there's potential that at some point that little interlude in the middle of the episode could be an ad or something like that. But the reason that we decided to add that in originally was really just to give a little bit of breakup so that there wasn't just the monotony of you listening to us talk the whole time. You got a little pause. And we don't do it on episodes like tonight's where we do the top 5 lists or things like that. But we do it when there's a clear break in the episode, whether it's like a review at the beginning and then some game chatter at the end, or like an interview at the beginning and then a different topic. So I think it's fun just to have a little breakup. I think that's just something that I found when I'm listening to a podcast that lasts a little while, just breaks it up a little bit, tells me there's an interlude. What do you guys think? Do you think that works when you listen? Do you enjoy that break? Is that something that still makes sense to you, or are we just doing it out of habit at this point?
I love it. And this is probably a good place to remind everybody that music is by our very own Adam, written and recorded. I actually find myself walking around the house sometime just sort of humming those little tunes, like the intro music and the after this music, and I love it.
I enjoy it too. I like that song too, Chris. I think it's fun when Tim says right after this, it goes boom and blows up the speakers, and you got this like little thumpity thump going on. It's a nice little shift from board game to on the table or whatever goofy stuff we're about to talk about. So I enjoy that little 2/3 of the way through little break.
There you go. So if who knows, someday in the future when enough people listen to us that somebody wants us to pay us to talk about their games or something, maybe that's where we'd put it. Probably not. We'll probably never do that. But in any case, hopefully you enjoy that little pause from having to listen to me ramble on and on about games for an hour. Okay, so the next review we got this week was from Samir Biswas in the United States. And this is a little bit longer one, so hang in there because it was great to read. So they said, a board game podcast that deserves a wittier review title than I could come up with. A great podcast focused around friends discussing games that is easy on the ears and approachable to anyone interested in hobby board games. If NPR produced a show about board games, this is what it would be. I've always said that. I am the Terry Gross of board games. Just kidding. No, I'm sorry. That was an insult to Terry Gross. So the format, which usually does a deep dive into first impressions of one game, makes most episodes evergreen. I started listening a few weeks ago, and this has quickly become my go-to games podcast during my morning walks and on the drive to and from work. And it's family friendly with a cadence that I can listen to even if I'm with young kids in the car. On that note, apologize for Chris's outro that he added in at the end of the last episode, where it caught me in my worst moment last week. So sorry for that.
Holy curse, Tim! That was bleepity bleep.
I bleeped in the appropriate spot to keep it family friendly.
That was minimal coverage bleep. You could really see some of the bikini areas with those bleeps.
It was. You could pretty much hear the start and the end of that. I don't feel like anyone missed anything there. All right, back to the review. I really enjoy the discussions about both recent and older games. I've been going through the back catalog, listening to their takes on games I already enjoy, as well as games I've considered getting. Always leaving with something to think about, even if I don't agree with their hot takes. Also appreciating the episodes that delve into themes and comparisons of different games in a single episode. The banter is always calm and friendly with lots of good points. The connections between the hosts seem very strong and deep. Their friendships are evident from the way they interact. And I can respect and appreciate that they try to take into consideration the perspectives of those not commonly represented in the board game industry. The podcast itself is very well produced without seeming overproduced. As I'm rapidly getting caught up on 3 years of shows, I hope they continue to put out shows for many more years to come. I reiterate that it's a great show with a lot of positives that everyone should check out. Samir, thank you so much. The amount of time that it takes you to write a review like that is probably more work than we put into the show every week. So really appreciate that. Love hearing this type of stuff, and it does make me feel, like we're putting something out that people enjoy.
Yeah, I want to say thank you. Those are some of the things I take pride in with the show. You're hitting all the things that I really care about. So thank you so much for putting it in words and letting us know how you feel about it. Really appreciate that.
And Samir, thank you so much for the NPR reference. That is the only radio station I listen to here is Oregon Public Broadcasting. So that just meant so much to me.
Seriously, I told my wife somebody left a review with that statement. She's like, wait, was that supposed to be a compliment or an insult? And I was like, no, it's a compliment. It's a good compliment. That's
huge
a good
compliment. Come on.
So somebody once said to my wife and I something about being fun, and we said, we're fun. And they responded, well, you're NPR fun.
Chris, that was an insult.
I think it was. But not to me.
All right. Well, again, thanks for listening, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the show. Until next week, take care.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.